Hello and welcome to the Cyber Insights podcast, brought to you by the ISACA Greater Washington, D.C. chapter. I'm your host, Jim Wiggins, and I'm joined today by my co-host, Mr. Altan Bulut. And our guest today is Ms. Sushila Nair, the president of the ISACA-GWDC chapter. We'll be talking with Sushila about the following topic: building a resilient cybersecurity strategy from threat analysis to roadmaps. Let's get into the episode.
So thanks everyone for joining us. We appreciate you coming in and spending your time with us today. As I mentioned, we're joined by Ms. Sushila Nair, and she's a highly respected cybersecurity professional with over 25 years of experience in the field. Sushila today is an independent consultant, helping organizations optimize their cybersecurity posture through training and consulting. She was the vice president and head of cybersecurity services for the North America at Capgemini, and before that, the global cybersecurity portfolio led for NTT Data Services. So we're really excited for her to be here today. Sheila, how are you doing today?
I am great, Jim. Really looking forward to the conversation.
And Altan, how are you doing today?
I'm really excited, Jim.
Awesome. Okay, so hey, what we like to oftentimes do on the show to kind of get things started is to ask for guests to kind of spend a few minutes and just talk about their background and their journey. Like, what brought you into the cybersecurity field? So, Sushila, can you talk a little bit about what maybe sparked your interest and ultimately how your career evolved? Can we start there?
Yeah, absolutely. And amusingly enough, I actually put it down to my final teacher when I was doing high school, and he was exceedingly sexist. And, his comment to me was, I don't even know why women are doing physics as your final year because you're all just going to end up pushing prams. And I'd heard that he'd actually failed his engineering exam. So when he turned around to me, he said, what do you want to do for a living? What are you going to do at university? I said, engineering, naturally. Mostly to annoy him, and there rolled out the future of my life on one little conversation, because I got accepted into the engineering school, graduated with an engineering degree. There was a little bit of a downturn at that point in engineering, so I went into programming, which was really, really useful because I understand application development pretty well, and not happy with living with my own bugs, I decided to jump into networking because I really preferred living with other people's vulnerabilities, I think. And over time, I became really concerned that organizations were struggling to understand the importance of security and the challenge of securing their systems, and so quite naturally fell into cybersecurity from sort of computer architecture, particularly as the internet really began transforming the world as we know it.
Understood. So that's a great background. Appreciate the kind of overview. You kind of alluded to your engineering and coming up through that, what I kind of think of as more as the operational side of it. From the technology, how did you kind of transition from that operational role to kind of the leadership role? Can we get you to kind of provide some context there?
Yeah, and in fact, that's a question a lot of people ask me. They go, how can I transition from, doing technical work to more of a leadership role? And the real important thing, I think, as you move into leadership is to have some soft skills. So really build up the soft skills, your emotional intelligence, the capability to communicate. I was very lucky. Communication was always part of sort of my personality, and that became something that really played well into going along a leadership track. And my wide knowledge of cybersecurity, along with the capability to communicate and educate, really shaped my transition from a technologist to a cybersecurity leader, driving security strategies for global organizations. So for people that are looking at making that transition, really build up some of those communication skills to complement your technical skills. I really had the privilege to work across multiple different industries, everything from healthcare, finance, and critical infrastructure. And I found it such an interesting career.
I think Altan's going to ask you the next question.
That's fascinating. But I wanted to focus a little bit on the perspective of people who are just starting their journey in cyber. So maybe they haven't developed those technical skills yet, or maybe they're deciding what route they should devote their careers to. So how do you suggest people look into their strengths and weaknesses and decide on what to focus on? Should they double down on their strengths? Maybe they're very strong in communication, they should just be more organizational and governance focused, or should they try to balance it? Do you see any pros and cons of different approaches there?
That's a really wonderful question, and people quite often ask me about that. How do I strike a career in cybersecurity or go into it? And I would say that cybersecurity is really wide. It's like asking, saying you want to be a doctor. There are everything from a cardiologist to a general practitioner, and they're all quite different. So first of all, really articulate and think about what you're good at. Are you good at solving problems? Do you enjoy finding challenges? Something like penetration testing for people that are deeply technical and enjoy solving puzzles. For people that are very, very organized and love creating great processes, governance and risk might be better suited. So first of all, understand what you're good at. And my father always used to say to me, you always excel at what you're good at. So be very honest with yourself and track what you're good at. And then, as you pointed out, Altan, also understand your weaknesses. Because if then you're doing penetration testing, for instance, and you're like, hey, what I really want to do is lead the pen testing team. I want to move my way to being a CISO. So you got to look at your weaknesses and go, okay, I understand I'm technically great and really good at solving puzzles. What is it that I need from a leadership perspective? And these are generally soft skills. Soft skills quite often is harder than technical skills. Then you have to start to build up those skills that you're missing around things like presentation skills, communication skills, to complement your technical capability. And remember as well, as you climb up that ladder, general skills are very, very important. So widen your capability along with building up those capabilities to be able to manage and lead teams.
Yeah. There's also this concept of career capital. You might be familiar with it. Cal Newport at Georgetown University is kind of one of the originators of that idea, where he is pointing out that a lot of people, while they might enjoy what they're good at, because a lot of times what you excel at is naturally feels good.
Yeah.
There may not be a strong market demand for what you're good at always. So what are your thoughts on that? The idea is you need to try to find a balance between what you like to enjoy, what you like to do today, what you like to be a couple of years from now, and what the market values. And would it be worth it to focus on something that you don't love, but maybe after developing an expertise after a couple of years might end up enjoying?
I love that question. That's such a brilliant question. So people often will say, and we'll often say, well, should I do this because I could see this enormous market growth in this area, right? A lot of people went to cyber because they believed they could earn high salaries, for instance, right? And the question becomes, can you be good at something that you don't truly enjoy? And the even larger question that you rightly point out, which is, if you choose a path where there's not a lot of jobs in it, how are you going to struggle uphill, right, to be able to kind of build a career? And then finally, in this age of AI, which jobs are going to be automated out of existence, right? So we really have to kind of plan this very carefully. I fundamentally believe if you have no interest in an area and you go there just because there's money, you don't tend to be terribly good at it. So either, and I always used to say this with my son, I go, you have to either cultivate and learn to create a passion for this subject, and if you don't have that passion, then be very, very wary of taking this path, because you could probably be middling at your career, and that will block you eventually from moving to the levels that you want to be at. Some people have a gift at being able to be interested in anything, and they can kind of head in any direction, right? And then by all means, tune it to things like securing AI systems, towards governance, data, right? Securing of data becomes so important to this area. But even within that, if you're looking at it and you're going, okay, how do I tune my career? If you're going to go down an area like networking, where traditional networking has completely been upended by things like Secure Services Edge, you're going to have problems, right? Instead, head in an area networking which is growing. Secure Services Edge is a great networking area to be. So when you're tuning what you're doing, use things like emerging threat reports, emerging technology reports to understand where are the areas that are going to be there for 5 to 10 years. Align it with your interest areas, because as I said, it's difficult to be good at what you don't enjoy, and then move from there.
That's awesome. A lot to think about there.
Absolutely. Hey, real quickly, Sushila, I wanted to ask you, so in your current role, what are you doing today relative to helping organizations around strategy, around some of the consulting work you're doing? Can we spend a few minutes talking about that?
Yeah, sure. So today I help organizations through advisory and training services. I'm really passionate about helping organizations develop their defenses. And I love assisting with putting together roadmaps to build resilience and educating boards, right? Very often board members, they understand financial risk. They really just struggle with things like cyber risk. And once they understand what they need to know, what they need to be able to question the team about, they're never going to know what button to push on a firewall. But what they do need to understand is, for instance, the risk of things like vendor lock-in. And so educating cyber to be able to speak to leadership and for leadership to understand what cyber risk is, it's an area that I feel passionately about and really enjoying myself.
Understood. Hey, can we define for our audience what we mean by the term cybersecurity strategy? I mean, what is it, and why is crafting a strategy really important for an organization?
That's really great. So, there was a time in cybersecurity where I remember when somebody would go to a show, a computer show, and then they'd come back and go, oh, I saw this really cool thing, and the vendor said if you buy this thing, it will stop ransomware attacks. So what we should do is go out and buy the thing. We no longer do cybersecurity that way, or at least I hope we don't. Instead of taking a kind of reactive pose where the last vendor conversation may be the avenue that we're investing in, what we're really doing is taking a much more structured approach to the way that we invest in cybersecurity. What we need to do is treat cybersecurity risk just like we treat any other risk. So what we need to understand is do some form of risk assessment, understand what our risks are, align cybersecurity with the way that the company is investing in technology. So in other words, the CISO and CIO have to be kind of, really aligned there, because the CIO is going out and investing perhaps next year in Gen AI, or maybe they're investing in something else. And we need to be lockstep with that to say, this is how we're going to secure those new developments and how we're going to train our people to be able to reach it. So a cybersecurity strategy generally results in a 3 to 5 year roadmap, which enables you to understand how you're going to invest over time, and the spend is aligned with the company goal and mission. So a cybersecurity strategy is a strategy around securing your infrastructure and technology so you're able to achieve your organizational goals and mission.
So with all of that being said, how do you think newer emerging technologies like, artificial intelligence, cloud, IoT, quantum, how do they all factor into that, and how does an organization respond?
That's a really, really great question, because the strategy is never a static strategy. Every year you have to go back and have a look at your emerging threats as well as emerging technology, so that we can kind of guess the way that businesses are going. So for instance, we understand, especially after this year, the businesses are going to invest a lot of money on AI, right? And we also recognize that there are going to be a lot of there's AI for good and there's AI for bad. So we're going to invest internally in using AI to be able to automate and be smarter and faster the way that we're kind of responding in a business context. But we're also going to be tacked using AI. And so with those kind of emerging threats as well as emerging technologies, we have to be really aligned with the business to understand, okay, if that is what the business is going to invest in next year, how am I going to secure it? How am I going to invest in it? How am I going to develop skills within that? And then also understand that these attacks are coming. And that may not have been in your roadmap for investment on 2025, but it better be now. So you got to go back every year and really streamline your security strategy and your security spend to constantly align with new technology advancements along with new attacks. So you're going to use both of these as inputs into your strategy. For instance, Gartner's been predicting that we're going to have a huge growth of robots in our environment and human augmented intelligence. I know they've had several attempts at getting us all to wear smart glasses and all these kind of augmented technology, but it will happen. It will happen. And as we look at that kind of curve, as we technology becomes so much more intrinsic part of us even, the way that we then start to secure the manner that we work becomes more and more challenging.
Understood. So, we've talked a little bit about the why, and we've talked a little bit about the what in terms of strategy, what it is, and why it's important. Let's talk a little bit about the how. How would an organization start to craft a cybersecurity strategy? Any thoughts on that?
Yes. So first of all, you're going to gather all of your inputs, right? So you're going to have a look at your threat reports. You're going to have a look at your technology reports. You're going to align yourself with the CIO to understand what's going to be happening. What's the 3 to 5 year plan for the business, right? Where are we going to invest? What are we going to do? You're also going to spend some time with the business understanding what your critical assets are, what your critical processes are, because what are you going to secure, right? And where the business is really going. If you don't already have a security program, you should go out and select some kind of security framework or security standard. In other words, there's been a lot of work that's been done by folks like NIST and CISA and International Standards Organization, ISO, which was put together by the UN, to help us put together the most sensible kind of security controls in place. And we refer to those as security controls, and security controls are what basically controls the amount of risk that comes out of cyber, if you like. So once you've had a framework, you can actually decide within that framework, hey, which of these areas am I going to invest in based on the threats and based on the company investment? So in other words, I'm going to invest this year in putting in multi-factor authentication because the attack data says that more and more organizations are going to be attacked in this way, and I'm going to target rolling it out in the first year. But I also recognize from the threat reports that there is a lot more multi-factor authentication style attacks, MFA bypass attacks, right? Attacks against the process. So my 3 to 5 year map is going to say that not only am I going to have MFA, I'm going to have phish-proof MFA, and I'm going to augment it with an identity fabric, and this is the path that I'm going through. So really kind of pulling that together, right, is the first thing you have to do is understand the business, understand what capacity they have for risk, right, where the business is going in terms of missions and goals. You're going to do a risk assessment. You're going to have a security framework. I really like the NIST Cybersecurity framework because it allows you to actually develop what is a current profile, which is your current security posture, and a target security profile. And so you can build up very, very easy roadmaps to say, here is where I am, which is your current profile, and then a target profile of where you want to go to. And the community has done a wonderful work with creating all of these profiles for the cybersecurity framework, and you can just go pull it off the website and go, I work in manufacturing. This is a great target cybersecurity profile for me. I know where I want to go. So now I know where I am. I know where I want to go. All I have to do is map it into my 3 to 5 year plan. Boom, right? That's the way to go.
That makes sense. So like leverage what's already there rather than reinvent the wheel,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Altan?
In terms of the implementation of several strategies, like how do you see like organization size being an impact in what difficulties they face? For example, in an organization that is spread across the globe with tens of thousands of employees versus just a like small or medium-sized enterprise. How does that differ from your view and perspective overall?
That's a brilliant question, because I'd love to say that, that you would take exactly the same approach, and you really don't, because with small organizations, they have a smaller budget. Very often they have a different risk profile. Like startups, they want to go fast. They're willing to take more risks. And therefore, from a cyber perspective, you may make great concessions. You're always going to try and address all the areas of security hygiene. And so for smaller businesses, you want to use a framework that is less onerous, but address the majority of the threats that we're seeing out there in the wild. So something like CIS is brilliant. It has prioritized controls that are mapped against breach data that says, hey, go ahead and do these 20 things, and that's addressing all your cybersecurity hygiene, right? That keeps it simple for smaller businesses. They're like, hey, I got to do these things. I know it's a bit of a checklist, folks, but it helps when you're smaller sometimes to have a checklist. And you go through and you go, these are where the majority of attacks occur, and I'm going to go through and I'm going to address these, this set of controls. And that's a very valid way to go about it. For larger organizations that have more people, more capability, more budget, you can work with something like the cybersecurity framework. And the cybersecurity framework works well for medium to large size organizations, requires kind of a medium size investment that enables you to create that, current profile to target profile. However, that's not an auditable standard. So where you have clients, where you want to go, hey, I want to really prove that I am secure here, right? You might go out and do ISO. ISO is really well recognized, 27001. You can be audited against it. You can have a certificate, and you can show it to organizations to say, this is proof of my security because I've been audited by a big five, and, this really shows that I'm doing the right things. That's the most expensive route to go as well, because the number of requirements really kind of go up, and the management of those requirements go up. So my recommendation really is it's kind of a horses for courses, and you have to align what is business realities, things like budget, and also what risk that data presents. Are the bad guys really after the data that you have, right? Along with how much you're spending on security, what your budget is.
Fascinating. That just speaks to the unique circumstances of the business being at the core of that strategy, right?
Yes.
A lot of people think of cyber strategy, they go immediately to the technical stuff.
Yes.
How do I, what is my SIEM going to look like, and what kind of stacks do I need? But you need to first think about, what is your business? What are you doing?
Yeah, how much money have you got, and what's the value of the data, and how much they're going to go after it? That's brilliantly said. Historically, cyber people really were about the technology, and they would throw their hands up in the air if the person was like, no, I can't afford to put in multi-factor authentication everywhere. You're like, whoa. Now we're like, okay, well, there are different levels and different capabilities and ways to deploy multi-factor authentication. Let me find a way that will match your budget, that will enable your business, and build a roadmap for you. We have to align ourselves with the business, and especially if you're interested in those leadership roles, you need to come from a business angle, and that will really help you.
Makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
So I was curious relative to discussing the idea of a roadmap. You brought that up earlier, and ultimately kind of charting a strategy relative to it. Organizations with all of these technologies that we're discussing have to prioritize. They have to decide where they're going to focus their efforts. I'm sure it's not just check a box and you're suddenly, your strategy's been flushed out. I guess my question for you is, how would an organization think about prioritizing all the myriad initiatives that they have that would go into their strategy to really kind of shape that roadmap and ultimately work towards that strategy? Can you talk about that for a minute?
So, yeah, could you run that past me again? So are you talking about once they've kind of gone through and done their risk assessment and identified where their risks lie, and they've selected which controls will kind of, or which projects will kind of address those risks, then you're going to kind of develop your roadmap from there.
Well, so I guess what I was envisioning is that if you have a strategy, which is your end game, you talked,
Yes.
for example, earlier about maybe getting ISO 27000
Yes.
certified as an example. That's one potential initiative that an organization might choose. But there could be, based on the discussion we were just having a few moments ago, other business objectives that we need to also. So how does the organization make those kind of trade-off decisions when they're flushing out their strategy? Because in my world, or in my thinking is, the roadmap is really the mechanics of how we get to that strategy,
Yes.
right? How we actually have that strategy unfold. And I guess what I was kind of envisioning was, well, I know where I'm at. Maybe I know what my current profile is in the CSF.
Yeah.
I know what my target profile needs to be. But in order to get there, I need to make certain kind of trade-off decisions.
Yes.
And that's really what I was kind of alluding to.
Yes, and that is really, really kind of difficult to decide, right? Is which of these, especially when you come into an organization that has a low maturity around cybersecurity. I've often seen that, and it's a struggle, right? Because you can't go to the business and go, oh, actually, I need $1 gazillion because for the last 5 years we haven't invested properly in cyber. So, we need that, and then we're going to go fix it all because we got a lot of tech debt here, guys. That's not going to work for you, and that's really hard. So what you're going to have to do, and the business is going to ask you to justify this because they're not cyber people, right? So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to look through after doing that risk assessment and choose the areas of largest risk. And what becomes additionally important, right, is you have to use the CIO's roadmap or the technology roadmap for the company, because in 2025, if the company goes down and is deploying all of these AI systems, right, suddenly your roadmap just isn't about improving your, moving further to your target profile. Your target profile has changed because your risk landscape has changed because the company is introducing all of these technology projects, which is going to change the environment in 2025. So when you put and every year you're putting your strategy together and refining your strategy, right? So when you're putting it together, you are sitting side by side and using as an input what is the technology roadmap for the organization. You're also using your current technology and your existing roadmap and risk levels. So you're going to make decisions like, for instance, hey, if we don't make that change, we're going to fail our PCI audit, and then we can't actually process card data, and that's our biggest risk for our organization. So in spite of the fact I want to launch that data governance project, which is really going to help us secure our AI systems, I have to prioritize my PCI remediation efforts. Provided, and this is you, because you, as a cybersecurity person, you're not accepting the risk, right? It's not you. You are presenting it back to leadership, and you're saying to them, hey, if we address this PCI audit and we don't do the data governance, we have this level of risk when we deploy Gen AI systems. Can you find the budget to do both? Because we really highly recommend that. And if you don't, this is the risk that you face as a business. So it's down to the business to make that decision, not us, because the business needs to decide what risks and what amount of risk they're willing to accept. So be very careful, because cybersecurity people of the past, we took that to heart. We believed if the business was exposed, we felt like it was us. We hadn't done our job properly. Now we have to go back to the business, go, we're advisors. Just like they're legal advisors, we are advisors. We advise the business, but at the end of the day, the business may choose not always to do the right thing. And we have to help them, in spite of that, secure themselves to the best that they can.
Understood. Okay, so let's put some meat on the bone, or let's maybe share an example of maybe a case study if we could. Can you share an example of where maybe you helped an organization kind of flush out or maybe develop a security strategy?
Yes. Perhaps one of the best examples I could, as I was working with a small financial organization. So, that's always challenging. We were talking about when you're not a tier 1 bank with a budget of a small nation, right, to secure yourself. Here you're a lean, mean startup, financial startup, right? How can you secure yourself? Because your data is just as interesting as perhaps a large tier 1 bank. So one of the things that I did that they were really struggling with is often financial organizations have a lot of compliance requirements and there's a lot of regulatory risks. So what we were doing is, because they were small, we were making sure, first of all, that they could have a target security profile that they could manage, right? And we also developed a current security profile that they had. And we prioritized the security control implementation according to the CIS controls, because we already know those are the top ways you get attacked. And we reported up to leadership based on that security hygiene level, right? To say, hey, we're first of all addressing hygiene, then we're going to move up to a CSF level, right? And then proceed beyond that. We also educated the board so that they understood that they needed to prioritize cybersecurity spend and budget and where their risk actually lay. And we also educated all the managers in the organization, so when it came to budget time, they weren't voting against the cyber measures, that they understood that they themselves, the lines of business, were getting value out of this move. As a result of that, they actually put in place a risk officer. We created a single unified framework which addressed all of their compliance requirements. So we actually created that profile, if you like. We then created their both the current profile and the target, and aligned their organizational reporting so the board actually knew where they were. Today, their security hygiene has really improved. They have a drop in security incidents by 40%, and their regulators much happier. So good things.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Altan?
So Sheila, I was wondering about your views on the role of companies that are specialized in cybersecurity, whether they might be offering a consultancy type of service, or maybe a product, or an ongoing managed service provider. So how do you see both their role, like in the current landscape, in terms of what kind of value they provide either to small enterprises that may not have their full-time cyber operations set up and going, and for the larger enterprises too? And then in the near future, how do you envision that evolving? And then what are in your perspective, what are some of the opportunities in the maybe in the market that you see as a gap, perhaps?
I think that's a really great question. So I've come from the background of managed security services providers and global system integrators. There's definitely being, at the moment, a huge transformation that's occurring. A lot of things like managed infrastructure and even managed cyber to some extent has become like a commodity service, right? They're really going, if you're not offering managed firewall out of a lower cost market, then I'm not interested, because I want you to do it cheaper than I can do it myself. So there is a drive, especially for organizations that are looking at cost cutting, to go for managed services, because theoretically, global systems integrators should be able to do it for cheaper than you. You really have to be careful about making sure they can do it better than you. Theoretically, they should be able to, because they have a wide customer base and they're actually collecting data across their clients and all of the rest. But that's something that your process would kind of have to address. Certainly systems integrator for some of this more commoditized areas tend to be a very good solution because many organizations want to focus on their core business. And their core business is not technology. And if your core business is not technology, you will not, get a really good outcome. I have seen some organizations put some brilliant leading-edge cyber departments together. The question becomes, is the cost of that worth the investment versus outsourcing? And only you, from a business perspective, can work that out.
So how do you see that shifting when you think about the rapid move into the cloud space that have built-in SaaS products that offer to solve all of your problems? Like if you subscribe to this feature and so on.
Yes, no, it's interesting because, before all our tech used to be on-prem, we used to, manage everything from the hardware up to the software. The reality is most people, technology is not part of their core business. They weren't really good at it. I used to come across servers in kitchens, cabling closets where you were like, oh my word. So for many, many organizations, the drive towards electing companies that this is part of their core business really, really makes sense. The challenge is there has been a drive to try and do that for as cheap as possible, right? So what you're doing is you're driving the managed security services provider to do it for pennies. And then you're sitting around going, well, I don't think this outcome's very good. Maybe we should have done it for ourselves. So you have to realize that when you're working with some kind of managed security services provider or even in a consulting company, that it's a partnership. You're not supposed to kill your partner, right? So you have to strike a deal that is a good deal and that is a true trusted partnership where the reporting back and forward and the ownership and all of the rest really functions. And what companies have to do if they go down this track is get really, really good at governance, because their key role is governance, right? And really outsourcing very, very well, because you outsource purely on price, you're going to get a bad outcome. The reality is many companies are moving down this because essentially cloud is an outsourcing. It's an outsourcing play, right? A SaaS is an outsourcing play. You're saying, I don't want to write my own applications. I was crap at that. I don't want to manage my own hardware. I want somebody else to do it. So if you go along this path, and you can outsource anything, right? You can outsource mowing your lawn. You can outsource cleaning your house. You can have a good outcome from that, or you can have a crap outcome from that. And that depends on how good you are at outsourcing. So if you're going down this track, you got to get really, really, really good at governance and really, really good at outsourcing. And that's a skill level, because there's no golden prizes here, in the sense of if you outsource, it may not improve your life. If you outsource well, it probably will.
A lot of great insights. A lot of food for thought.
Thanks, Altan.
So, with all of that being said, one of the things that I'm kind of noodling in my mind is you're talking about a lot of risk-based decisions. Do we go with this direction? Do we go with that direction? If we go with cloud, blah, 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 right? So I'm curious, when we talk about roadmaps and we talk about, trying to move towards that strategy, you've got to make some risk-based decisions. I'm wondering, from your perspective, what kind of tools and techniques do you recommend that an organization could employ to try to, assess their risk and then ultimately use that to kind of help lend itself towards making different types of decisions along that roadmap? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, human beings are remarkably terrible at gauging risk. I mean, we're all really bad at understanding risk. And what's worse is we often think we're kind of quite good at it. But we really need a structured methodology, ideally, to be able to address this. So firstly, I think it's about education and learning about risk. I mean, one of the things that we're really doing at GWDC is focusing on risk-based training, because step one is understand risk, understand what tools and frameworks that you have out there. There's been a lot of interest on doing more quantitative risk-based approaches like FAIR. So FAIR has really kind of grown in popularity. There's also CIS RAM, which actually takes a risk-based attack approach to implementation of controls. And again, we've actually got CIS presenting in January that will educate as well around this. And then choosing good tools that are out there is part of the battle, but really having a good understanding and framework, because to some extent, risk today is still quite qualitative. We don't have a lot of historical data because the risk landscape moves so quickly. So it really tends to be about understanding the business, understanding the threat landscape, understanding the process. And so those educational opportunities are really a bit of a game changer, as well as doing some homework and kind of working out, understanding for smaller organizations, things like what's offered by CIS, or for larger organizations, looking at the NIST risk management framework, and also looking at FAIR as well, that NIST actually does call out, and certifications like C-Risk, which I think is really, really good, doing things like one-day risk assessment courses, and really kind of building up your knowledge around risk.
Maybe spend a minute, if you could, talk a little bit about what the Greater Washington, D.C. chapter provides in that context, because I know they offer a number of different certification programs and a number of different training opportunities. You talked about the conference, but if someone wants more formal, what other kind of opportunities are there to kind of build out that knowledge set?
Brilliant. Yeah, and this is an area that really interests me. Like, I always want to improve my own knowledge around risk. And so, we're scheduling in January a course on the NIST Cybersecurity Framework version 2, because there's a new version out. They've created the new governance tower, so I'm really excited about that. I'm going to attend that myself, actually. I'm really excited about that. We also offer the C-Risk, which is the ISACA certification, and that's a really great background in risk. But we also have the risk fundamentals training as well, which is, nice little certification, one-day kind of thing to give you all the fundamentals around risk. And then finally, as I mentioned, we're also going to be scheduling a one-day how to do a risk assessment, right? I think that's always really useful for people because they always throw it in, right? NIST has got it, PCI, just do a risk assessment. You're like, okay, but give it to me in steps. So we're going to give it to, folks in steps so they can clearly outline it. And then, as I mentioned, at the in-person conference, you'll be able to actually select additional training. So you don't have to just attend the conference on the May 19th that we're doing with GMU. We're actually able to also select different trainings. And so there will be, for instance, training perhaps around AI for auditors, or there may be training as well around risk that we're actually putting in place. So I'm really excited about that, where we're actually using a platform to do crisis simulations so people can get hands-on, practice around how do you test your controls for things like ransomware.
So you kind of provided a perfect segue to my next question. I want to talk a little bit about forward-looking insights and some emerging trends. I wanted to discuss a little bit about AI. It seems like it's all I can ever read about anymore that's in the news, and ultimately machine learning. How do you think that these kinds of technologies are starting to shape the area of cybersecurity strategy? Do they have any kind of impact? Are they having any kind of touch point? Can you speak to that for a minute?
Yes, and I think it's fascinating because AI is going to offer us so many benefits. It's going to change the world. It will help us find the cure for cancer. It will help us answer questions that we didn't even know we had the question for. I mean, it will help us communicate with whales. We're deconstructing the whale language. It's just phenomenal. But also, AI can obviously be used for sophisticated attacks that are actually happening now, right? And so, for instance, there's a new AI tool called Fraud GPT, which have been circulating on the dark web and on Telegram, right, ever since 2023. We have, the capability or the baddies have the capability to be able to subscribe to these services. So, for instance, Fraud GPT, it's kind of ranges from $200 per month to $1,700 per year. And you get this tool that will enable hackers to be able to write malicious code, scam pages, create fraudulent messages, conduct business email compromise attacks. Business email compromise attacks have become the largest attack, social engineering attack that there is out there. And so, there have been over 3,000 confirmed sales of this just at the end of 2023. So you're seeing the bad guys really adopt AI, right? Because we were all teaching our users, hey, this is how you support if it's if it's a phishing email. Look for bad spelling. Look for bad grammar. That's gone, folks. So in your cyber strategy, because we don't have the tools at the moment to really detect AI generated attacks like fake videos. I don't know if you caught the one where there was a worker in Hong Kong in the financial sector, and there's actually a video call that involves his boss and his financial director telling him to transfer money, right? And he sees them say it. What training do you have today in your security awareness that teaches your users what they do if that happens? I'm willing to bet it's not in your training catalog. So your strategy must be that you start to understand how AI is changing the threat landscape. You need to understand how to use AI in your audits and how you can go faster, because the bad guys are going faster by using AI. But you also have to understand how it's changing that attack landscape so you can educate your users while the tools actually catch up. And there are tools coming up. There are tools that recognize people's writing styles that will flag emails and say, hey, in spite of the no spelling and no grammar errors, that this looks like, it's a phishing attack. But as things catch up, you also need to really teach your users about risk and get them to understand that that when they feel a suspicion, right, that they're better able to go, this suspicion is actually a detection of risk. I understand that I'm feeling this is a risky situation. Make them, help them report it. Create risk champions within the business. But this is going to really impact your strategy next year. You need to be thinking about this and really refresh the way that you're focused on culture, cybersecurity cultures in your business.
That sounds like quite a dilemma. As you're describing, implementing and adopting AI can cut both ways.
Yes.
And so, do you feel most of the time optimistic, or do you see it's going to become more and more challenging as time goes on? And maybe there's the long-term concerns about AI, like the super intelligence and those kinds of singularity type of scenarios. How do you see that factoring in? And then maybe the role of humans in cybersecurity management even.
That's a great question. So, I often think to myself that if we knew everything we knew today about social media, would we have allowed social media in our children's lives and our own lives in the same way? I'm not so sure we would. And we see different states in the U.S. trying to legislate and protect their children against the damages around things like social media, where AI can do tremendous good. It can also be used for tremendous bad. And I don't think that we're well prepared for this. So that's an area of concern. I do see people trying to understand and legislate and move around this, but we're actually moving slower than AI is moving. So I believe that most people go into cybersecurity because they hear a calling, because they wish to help and defend the assets of Americans. So what we need to do is all commit to educating ourselves around AI. AI is not going away. It's staying. And AI will be for good if humans make it for good. If we ignore the risks and we don't start to control those risks either through legislation or technology, then I don't fancy what will happen next will be good. So it's all down to us. We get to decide how AI is used, but I really hope humans make wise decisions, because if we just let it evolve on its own, there are huge benefits to criminals and people that may not have the same world vision and goals that we do, and we leave ourselves exposed to that. So we must be very, very careful at this time, and this will take multi-prongs to be able to protect ourselves. It would take technology, but it's also going to take regulations as well, because we don't have the technology to protect ourselves at the moment.
I really hope that we're careful too. Like, it can be one of the most, if not the most consequential turning point in human history.
Yes.
So yeah,
It really is.
Hey, Altan, let me throw a data point out there. I just read recently that for our listeners that are familiar with ChatGPT, there are different versions of it, and I read a statistic or I read an article that suggested that the move from an intelligence from ChatGPT 4.0 to their newest one, which is what's called O1, which actually incorporates reasoning, is predicted or assessed to be on the magnitude of 10 times more intelligence. We're talking, within a 1 year period of time, when they released one large language model to go to the next, the output capability and the reasoning capability had increased by a factor of 10 times. And they're envisioning that the ChatGPT 5 that might be coming next year might follow suit. So we're seeing almost exponential increases in the technology, to your point, Sushila, that we as an organization or we as a society have not yet figured out how to get our hands around, and to figure out how are we going to predict or prevent some of the damage like Altan was alluding to. So I just thought that was an interesting data point.
No, that's a brilliant data point. It is true. It is going faster than we are. We're trying to sit back and go, hey, let's just use this thing. That's a bit like jumping in the car and going, well, I've never driven in my life, but you know what? I'll just drive it around for a while and then I'll work it out. And then you're like, and then I'll invent some road code and road rules. You're like, I'm not quite sure that's going to work out very well. So yes, we really, all of us must commit to making AI a core thing that we're learning so that we can protect society as well as organizations, because the impact could be massive, both for good and for bad.
Yeah. It is both scary and fascinating.
Yes. Yes. And I agree with you, Altan. It is the biggest change, that the world is possibly facing. It's up there with the internet itself.
Yeah, it's definitely disruptive technology. No doubt about that. All right, so let's talk about guidance that you might have for our listeners. How can people stay up to date and contribute to this broader community of, people that are involved in strategy, that are involved in risk, all these other types of things? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, definitely. It's a lot about staying current, and it's really hard today because we're bombarded by so much stuff. But follow industry reports, definitely one of my favorite, the Verizon DBIR, track the Gartner stuff, right? As much as you can, attend conferences, both virtual conferences and in-person conferences, because in-person conferences allows you to create networks. And then really engage in professional groups. I would love, ISACA-GWDC, because I've gained so much out of it. It's a place where you could share knowledge and where you could stay current, and that you could create networks with the people that are working in your industry. I learned so much out of talking to people like Jim, Altan today, wonderful conversations. So immersing yourself with your community allows you to go faster, to understand new things because of all of the different projects and avenues that people are exploring. And then also, if you get an opportunity and you're involved in one of these organizations, volunteer, become part of the fabric of the organization, because what we're all about is to protect our society, our technology, and build our knowledge so that we have the capability to be able to do that.
Understood. Let's put this in some context. Relative to the discussion around strategy that we're having earlier, I wanted to get your take on something. What do you think that some of the biggest mistakes that companies have or make today with regard to strategy? Are there things that you're seeing out there that they're doing that probably aren't in their best interest, or that they could probably try to avoid, just from lessons learned that you've actually seen? Any thoughts?
Yes, I think, one of the biggest mistakes that organizations can make is focusing too much on the technology without aligning it with business goals, or, ignoring the importance of employee awareness. Very often I see there's a lack of, cohesiveness between the different lines of business. I'll have a tool, let's say it's something like Tanium, which provides you with insight into what's installed on each of the end nodes, and the audit community will be using that, and then cyber will go deploy another tool that does exactly the same thing, right? So for large organizations, you need to really focus on the outcome and align it with the business goals. You should be thinking about things like platform rationalization and the importance of employee awareness, because they can be your early alarm system, or they can be, the hole that sinks you, right? So it's, something like 75% of breaches in healthcare this year had a human element. So that just really highlights the importance of employee awareness. And then, how can small businesses implement security strategies on a tight budget? A lot of small businesses are like, well, hopefully it just won't happen to me. I don't really understand what I should do first. Start with the basics. Everybody can put some security in place, right? Implementing multi-factor authentication, training staff to recognize phishing. CISA does a brilliant job at providing low or free tools, right, to monitor risks. So start with that. Start with the basics. Majority of attacks occur because people do not have security hygiene in place. What is a good list of what you should do to put good security hygiene in place? Go look at those CIS controls, right? Center of Internet Security does a great job with that. And then how do you balance compliance with real-world risk management? Often leadership understands compliance risk. They're like, hey, it's a checklist. We know that. Got to get that done, or the regulators won't let us do business. But we have to balance that with real-world risk. You see things like PCI. You see other regulatory compliance coming up and saying you have to take a risk-based approach. And the only way you do that is use frameworks to meet the compliance. Create things, universal frameworks will match all of your compliance requirements together. Customize those controls to address the organization's unique risks. Each organization has a different threat landscape, and that's what cybersecurity professionals need to be doing, is customizing it according to risk.
Great, thank you. Hey, we're closing in on time. We've only got about 5 minutes left. Wanted to ask if you could leave listeners with one key takeaway about building cybersecurity strategies. What would it be?
The most important thing that you can do around aligning your strategy is to align with the business goals and the threat landscape. That is the absolute most critical thing you can do. And if you can leverage well-known frameworks like NIST Cybersecurity Framework, that's available for free on the NIST site, or the CIS Controls, again, available for free, and this role of continuous education so that you're staying ahead of emerging threats. So bottom line is, you have to take a risk-based approach with cybersecurity and align yourself with business goals and your threat intelligence.
Altan?
Yeah, I don't have any other questions at the moment. I think we've covered a lot of ground here. It has been a fascinating conversation. And so over to you, Jim.
All right, so just to kind of make sure that we cover all of our bases, talk about for 60 seconds or so, talk about the GWDC, what it is and why it's valuable and why members might want to consider, or people might want to consider joining.
Yeah, so it was so interesting. I was actually between jobs. I had a job with a startup, and it went out of business. And I'm like, okay, I'm a massive qualifications, certifications. I'm just going to kind of sit here and a job will just reappear immediately. And I was quite shocked that it took me a little while to get my next position. And I realized something I should have realized much before, is that it's people that give you jobs. You can have as many qualifications as you like, but essentially you are your own shop window. You are your own brand, and you require a network. And therefore, it's very important that just like you have personal friends that may share interests with you, like reading or movies, you need your professional community. And that's when I started getting involved with ISACA-GWDC. I started to volunteer, first of all, in the newsletter, and then kind of eventually went on the board and became president. And I can tell you, I never got such great leadership training as being on the board, because if you can organize an event with people that you don't pay a cent to, and you have to inspire them to make it to that ending line, I guarantee you, you will build those skills. And so I think everybody should join organizations like ISACA Greater Washington, D.C. I mean, ISACA Greater Washington, D.C. was my favorite because it's got it's been a chapter for so long. It's got some great mature processes, so you really learn because of that maturity. And it is, while I've been on the board, that we became one of the biggest chapters in the world. We've had fun. It's been interesting, but it's also really helped my career. And I want to help other people gain what they want out of their careers. And I love how this can cast a spotlight on your career. It can give you the right network, wonderful training at a price, at a point you can, unbeatable as, so that's what I've got out of being an ISACA member, and that's what I want to share with other people, especially that are joining the cybersecurity field.
That's awesome. Final question for you. Mm-hmm. How can listeners contact you personally?
Wonderful. Yeah, so listeners can reach out to the webpage, ISACA-GWDC.org, and hit the contact us and contact the organization through that. Or they can email me. I'm president at, and then you just follow it at the URL link. We really welcome people to become part of this community. We're all volunteers, and there's it's great opportunities to build up that network.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Sushila, for coming in and sharing all of your really deep and insightful information in the context of cybersecurity strategy. We really appreciate it.
Oh, thanks so much, Jim and Altan. I've had a great time.
It's been fascinating.
And that's going to do it for today's episode. We want to thank everybody for joining us. And again, if you want to learn more about the ISACA-GWDC, make sure you reach out to www.isaca-gwdc.org. And we look forward to seeing you at our next episode. Everybody have a great day. Thanks a lot for joining us. Goodbye.